Hi guys, happy Sunday night. This is Sarah Marie from the Stellar Teacher Company. And if you are joining me live, I'm so excited because we are going to talk a little bit about book clubs tonight and how to get them up and running in your classroom in such a way to where it's going to be easy for you and a lot of fun for your students. And if you are not joining me live, I'm so glad that you're catching the replay of this. I do typically go live on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. And so I'd love for you to be able to join me. So just kind of keep that on your calendar. So I want to talk a little bit about book clubs for a couple of reasons. One, they are such a good part of such a good routine to incorporate into your reading block. I think it's one of the best ways to mirror an authentic reading experience for your students. And there are ways that you can do it in such an easy and effective way to where it's very little work for the teachers. I know I would usually try to get book clubs started kind of around this time of the year after a month or two into school, but I feel like I would always take so long to get them started, and I would do them one group at a time, and my students would be so excited for them, but I would get to the point where I was so overwhelmed with everything that I had some groups that were constantly begging me, when are you going to start our book club? When are you going to start our book club? And it wouldn't happen until after Christmas. And I always felt so guilty about waiting so long to get those students in book clubs because they were so excited. So my goal tonight is to give you 5 tips that you can use to get book clubs up and running that is going to help you get your book club started this week if you wanted to. Before we start though, I kind of have a selfish request. I am currently not in any book clubs myself. And if you have any good book club recommendations or any good book recommendations for adults, I would love for you to leave them in the comments because I'm looking for something to read myself. And I've always loved being a part of a book club because you get to hear what other people are reading. You get to talk about a book. So if you have any books to share with me, just leave them in the comments. And I'm going to go ahead and make my screen just a little bit larger so that way you guys can see. And then we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, just to make sure we're kind of all on the same page, what do I mean when I talk about a student-led book club? I know in the past, they used to be called literature circles. At least that's what they were called a lot of times when I got started. Now I think most teachers refer to them as book clubs. But really what it is when you have a small group of students who have a shared reading experience. Usually in upper elementary, we have our students reading a chapter book. Students will meet a couple times, whether it's every week, every other week, twice a week, depending on the schedule. But the goal of the student-led book club is for the students to be the ones facilitating the conversation. A lot of times teachers might sit in and listen, but the idea is that the students are practicing and applying the skills that you've taught them in a group with their peers. So think of it as another form of independent practice, but in a group. So why do we want to incorporate book clubs into our classroom? Well, first of all, it is one of the best experiences that really mirrors real life. And ultimately what we want to do is we want to provide our students with real life, authentic reading experiences that are going to help them become lifelong readers. And I know the majority of my adult life, I've been in a book club. So many of my friends have been in book clubs. And if we can introduce that to our students, even at a young age, that just helps them get really excited about reading. That helps them, again, become more confident in their independent reading identity. They know the types of books they like to read. They know the groups of people that they enjoy reading books with. And if they have a really positive experience in book clubs in elementary, more than likely they're going to want to have that same experience when they're older and adults. So it's just a really great way to encourage students to become independent, lifelong readers. And they're a lot of fun for our kids. I know anytime I started book clubs in my class, my students loved them. So let's go ahead and talk about what are 5 things that you can do to help get book clubs up and running. So first of all, the first thing that you want to think about is you want to make sure that you have a very clear agenda or routine for each of your book clubs. And here's the thing, there's no wrong way to do a book club. I know a lot of times you'll see all sorts of things out there about having students have roles or having specific jobs. And that is completely fine if that's how you want to run your book clubs. I've definitely done that in the past. But ultimately what you want is you want to have a very clear agenda and routine for your book clubs. So that way, no matter who your students are in a book club with, they can follow that same agenda and routine. Students really thrive off of routine. They thrive when something is predictable. You want each time students meet at the book club to know that they're going to spend the first 5 minutes summarizing what they just read. They're going to spend 2 minutes asking questions. They're going to spend 3 minutes sharing their connections, or really whatever it is. And so however you want to run your book clubs, whatever your specific agenda or purpose is, you get to decide what that routine or agenda looks like. So take a few minutes, just kind of jot down how long do you have for book clubs. If you have 15 minutes, that's going to look very different than if you have 30 minutes. If your students are reading together or reading differently, that's going to change up your routine. But sort of think about what do you want your students to get out of it, and then come up with your own agenda and routine for your book clubs. And then the next tip, and this was a lifesaver for me, introduce your book club structure. So rather than pulling groups and starting groups one at a time, decide what your agenda is, and then the next time you're doing a read aloud, use that time to introduce the idea of book club's whole group. You can put your students in their groups, so they have their 5 or 6 students that they're going to be in the book club with, but you're doing the read aloud for them. So whether it's a picture book or a chapter book, you are reading the text for them and they are just spending the time discussing. But when you do it whole group, there's a couple benefits to that. First of all, it saves you a ton of time because you're not having to pull individual groups and explain and introduce the structure to them over and over again. You're able to get all of your book clubs up and running the first or within the same week. And when you do things whole group, if you're reading aloud and then giving your students, 10, 15 minutes to discuss, you can walk around and monitor how your students are engaging with each other. You can spend a lot of time teaching them how to ask questions, how to listen, how to respond, and it gives you just a little bit more control. So if you have yet to start or introduce your book clubs, you can do it whole group. All you have to do is put your students in groups, and then, like I said, find a read aloud text, whether it's a picture book or a chapter book, and then use that as a way to introduce book clubs to your class, and it's going to save you a ton of time. Which kind of leads me into my next tip. The other thing that you want to do, and I don't think that this happens enough in upper elementary, but use picture books for your book clubs. I think so often we have this idea that we have to use chapter books, that students have to be in a book club for 3 to 4 weeks or an entire quarter. But the reality of it is your students can have a book club and they can spend time discussing one picture book, and that in itself is going to be a great reading experience for them. So you could do a couple things with this. One, if you want your students to just practice talking and discussing and engaging with a variety of peers, you could spend a couple weeks where each week you're having different picture books and students get to pick which picture book club they want to be a part of. Or you could have students do author studies where they're in the same book club, the same 5 or 6 students, and maybe for 1 week they're studying a bunch of Patricia Polacco books, and as a group they're going to read 5 or 6 of her titles and discuss the themes and discuss the characters and the trends that they see in the author. Or you could have them do a genre study as a book club. So you've got, again, 5 or 6 students in your same book club, but rather than reading a chapter book, they're going to read 5 or 6 picture books, and they're going to identify commonalities that they see in the genre. So just keep in mind that you can use any text for a book club. It does not have to be a novel. It doesn't have to be a chapter book. Any text, it can be an article, nonfiction, magazine, whatever it is. The whole purpose is for students to have a shared reading experience with their peers. So if you have yet to do a book club using picture books, I would encourage you to do so, and you can even start this week. Another tip that I want to encourage teachers to do, and I think so often we feel like we have to decide for our students, but let them choose their book club. And I know a lot of times, and I was this way as a teacher, I would worry, okay, what if they are what if they're in a book club and the book is too difficult for them? Or what if they're in a book club with their friends and they're off task? Or what if they're in a book club and it's not the right fit for people, or the text is too easy? But ultimately, you want your students to choose the book club that they're going to be a part of for a couple of reasons. Anytime that we incorporate choice, your students are going to be much more engaged with with the reading experience. They're going to be much more motivated to finish it. If they get to say, I want to read this book with these friends or these classmates, they're going to be much more excited and motivated than if you say, here's your book and here are the students that you have to participate with. So if possible, create 5 or 6 different book clubs and just have a sign-up sheet and let your students sign up and put a cap on the number of students that are allowed in each book club, but let them decide. Let them decide the friends that they want to be a part or that they want in their book club, and let them decide the titles. And there's nothing wrong if it is if you've got a group that they're best friends, they hang out together at recess, they have lunch together. If they're in a book club, that's great, because again, that mirrors real life. Now, you don't have to let your students pick every single book club, but I would definitely encourage you at times, and even when you're getting started, let them have that choice. Choice is such an important part of helping students become confident, strong readers. And then my last tip for getting book clubs up and running is minimize and simplify the book club homework. I think so often we have this idea that our students have to have they have to read, so many chapters, and they have to answer these comprehension questions and then come up with, questions, and they have to have connections and all these things that ultimately it becomes really difficult for them to get done. I know I always had students that were struggling to complete their book club homework in time. And if they have so much homework, that kind of takes away from the joy and the excitement of engaging in a discussion about the text. And again, the whole goal of a book club is to have that shared experience with classmates. So they don't have to have a ton of homework done. A lot of times that I would have my students, they got to decide. I would let my students decide what texts they wanted to read, or so how many chapters they wanted to read in the time frame. So if they wanted to read 1 chapter a week, 2 chapters a week, they got to decide. And then a lot of times I would just ask them to share what are 3 comments, or come to every book club prepared to share 3 comments, 2 connections, and a question that you had. And that's a really easy framework for students to jot down. They could do it on a note card, they could do it on a sticky note, but the less homework, I guess, that they have to do to prepare makes it easier for them, but it also makes it easier for you. You don't have to copy down novel study sheets. You don't have to check to make sure that they homework done. I think the more responsibility you can put on them, the more successful their book club is going to be. Which leads me to one of the final thoughts I want to leave with you is this idea that you want to let students run their own book club. So often teachers feel like they need to sit there and they need to facilitate and they need to monitor until students get to the point where they are independent enough. And I want you to keep in mind that, first of all, your time is better spent teaching than facilitating. And during a book club, if you sit in on a book club, you simply are facilitating, because that is not a time that we are teaching new content. That is a chance for students to practice and apply the skills that you've previously taught them. So let them run their own book club. It's okay if they don't get their chapters read in time. It's okay if not everybody comes prepared. That is an opportunity for them to learn sort of those natural consequences. If the rest of their book club is upset with them because they didn't prepare it, or if they gave away the ending, those are all sorts of experiences that they can navigate on their own. So try to just sit back, assign the book club, teach them the routine and the structure, and then let them go for it. And you use your time to pull guided reading groups or strategy groups or have independent reading conferences, because that's really where you're going to make a lot of growth with your students. So real quick, the last thing that I want to sort of answer for you guys, and these are some questions that I get from teachers when it comes to book clubs. So first of all, people ask, how often should I have book clubs running? And that really comes down to, you just get to decide. There's no magic number, or there's no sort of idea of you have to have book clubs running every quarter, every month, every week. You could decide that you want to have book clubs running, for 1 month out of the quarter. And for that 1 month, every student is in a book club, and then you wait until the next quarter. Or maybe you decide the way you have it set up is that you constantly have students in a book club and they're constantly rotating from book club to book club. The one thing that I want you to think about, first of all, when you are scheduling your book clubs, is to think about if students are also in a guided reading group, if they're also coming to strategy groups, if they have independent reading assignments, do they have enough time to balance all of the reading for their book clubs and every other part of reading that's going on in your classroom? So just sort of think about that in mind. How much reading are you asking your students to do, and do they have enough time to do that? But if you love book clubs and you want to constantly have your students in book clubs, go for it. If you're new to them and you've never done them before, try them out, see how they go, and then make a decision on how often you want to have them in there. The other thing that I hear a lot of teachers ask is, do I have to read the book for my students? Now, honestly, best practice, I would say yes. You want to make sure that you are allowing your students to read texts that are appropriate for their grade level, for their interests. So you just want to make sure that you have a solid understanding of that text. But really, it should be for every text in your library. So if you have a text that is in your library, I would say that you should feel confident letting your students have that book club. You don't have to read every single text ahead of your students. It's okay for your students to explore text and read text without you. You just want to make sure ultimately that it is an appropriate text for your students, and they're not going to read something or encounter something in the storyline that's going to be inappropriate for them. And then the last question I get a lot of is, should I assign roles for each student in the book club? So a lot of times teachers like to give their students roles like, one student is the summarizer, one student is the questioner, one student is the illustrator. And those are great ways. There's sort of pros and cons to both. So ultimately it comes down to, how do you like to plan? And how do you like to facilitate your reading block? If you like to have maybe a little bit more control and a little bit more structure, then I would say try giving students roles. The nice thing about when you use roles in your book club is that students only have to focus really on one preparing for kind of one specific part. They're coming up with questions, or they're writing a summary, or they're coming up with an illustration. So it's a really good way to sort of bridge this idea of helping them become a little bit more independent, because their preparation is very, very focused. One of the sort of negative sides or downsides to using rules is it's not necessarily very authentic. If you're in a book club as an adult, more than likely you don't have a specific role as far as interpreting the text. And then the other thing is it kind of limits students to have that authentic reading experience. If they're only looking for connections, or if they're only looking for questions, they might be kind of tunnel vision to the point where they're not paying attention to the entire text. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to your preference and what works best for your students. And you get to make that decision because you know your students the best. So if you enjoy doing book clubs with rules, use them. If it's not your thing, then feel free to ditch them, and you can still have effective book clubs without them. So those are my tips. All of those things you can start using this week. So if you have not started book clubs yet, I hope this is your week, and I would love to know how they go in your classroom. So don't hesitate to come back to this video, leave a comment, or reach out to me either on Facebook or Instagram and let me know how your students enjoy getting started with book clubs in your classroom. And hopefully you guys all have a great night and a good start to your week.